Hi, and welcome back to ADK Talks. I'm Jane, along with my co-host and brother, Steve. Say hi, Steve.
Hi, Steve.
And we're back with another episode of our podcast that brings you the best of the Adirondacks. Today's guest is someone who made a very big leap from boardrooms and global organizations to a former ski resort tucked into the High Peaks foothills. Rick Vidal is the co-owner of NewVida Preserve in Jay, New York, a place with deep Adirondack roots, a kind of complicated past, and a bold new future. If you've ever wondered what it really takes to reinvent a historic property or to reinvent yourself, this episode is for you.
And if you've driven Route 86 from Wilmington to Jay and wondered about the former Paleface ski area, or if you've believe the Adirondacks still have room for reinvention without losing their soul, you're going to love this conversation.
Great. Rick, welcome to ADK Talks.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just start at the beginning, if you will. If listeners who may not know the property's backstory, can you help walk them through the history of the land from when it was Paleface Ski Resort to what it became and eventually to NewVida?
So there was a gentleman who was called Doc by short. I never met him. He's long since passed, but he was a big skier and he loved the Adirondacks and would travel here frequently. And in 1961, he had the vision, being at that mountain, of creating this incredible resort modeled after some of these A-frame ski resorts in Colorado. And he had inherited some money from a family member, and he decided to put that to good use and build a portion of what is now the NewVida Lodge. It was formerly the Paleface main lodge, the gathering place. They finished that construction in 1961. They had a massive opening. A lot of it is still documented in former press releases and newspaper articles. And I think they said something like they had 1,000 guests on the opening day of the ski mountain as Paleface. And it had about 4 lifts and 40 or so runs. And it was very much the lifeblood of the community. It was both a place for tourists to come and gather, but also a place for the local community, and was considered very much the family-friendly ski resort or complement to Whiteface right down the road, which is considered more for the advanced skier, the technical skier training for competitions. And it operated that way from 1961 to the late 80s, traded hands a couple of times during the latter days after Doc passed away. And then ultimately, the Silverstein family, I believe, purchased it in 1988. So almost after 30 years of operating. And they made it a private residence. So they moved into what was then the lodge, and it took them, what I've been told, about 10 years or so to get the permits and plans to then build their residence up on the shoulder of Bassett Mountain. And thereafter, they moved into that house, and they kept all of the land and, the lodge as a gathering place, but just private for their family and friends. So really from that time, 1988, until we purchased the property in the very end of 2022, no one from the local community was allowed on the property.
I want to pause for a second and encourage our listeners to check out your website. It's newvida.com, NEWVIDA, and you can see a picture of that massive A-frame lodge. It's really impressive when you're in it and looking out the glass wall of windows that actually it overlooks Whiteface, right?
It does. In my opinion, and I think a lot have agreed to it, it has the most incredible view of Whiteface, unobstructed panoramic views, and the most incredible sunsets, because the sunsets kind of fall behind Whiteface there. And yes, the majority of that A-frame was what he originally built. It was added onto over time. And at that time that it was built, and this is also documented in the photographs that if you come and visit NewVida, you can see we've blown up and have as sort of a history wall in the lobby. the beams to put that A-frame together were so huge, and the major roadways weren't there. They were helicoptered in
Wow.
and then, put together in place with massive cranes. So it was a big undertaking for that community at the time.
It's a stunning property. It's so cool. And in fact, I think I shared this with you before you bought it and it was on the market for a while. A former coworker and I used to fantasize about buying it. And then I Googled how much it costs to repair a chairlift. And I was like, okay, this is beyond, my little nest egg. So, but it is a gorgeous property. How did you feel about it when you first encountered it?
So I, have come up to the Adirondack since I was a little boy, Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. I'm a big outdoor recreation enthusiast, so skiing, hiking, just year round. And had started our hospitality business here in the Hudson Valley called Cascada Farm years earlier, and that was operating successfully and sustainably. And so we were looking to expand, but looking to do that elsewhere outside of the Hudson Valley, and never necessarily imagining that far up. It's 3 hours north, which is not, huge, but it's a driving distance from where we are now in the Hudson Valley. And I happened to just see the listing and I thought, oh, let me call the listing agent and just take a tour of the property. I came, I believe, on 3 different instances to tour and hike all of the trails and go through all of the land. And every visit, I felt more in love with the property.
You talked about how the place has strong nostalgia for the locals, and you are also sharing that with them, and you are sharing the property. You're not just keeping it for your guests. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah. I think there's a couple ways where we try to honor the tradition. First, just in terms of its physical attributes and its architecture. As we started, we did an entire year of renovations, both in the systems and, and everything that you see that's public facing, just to stabilize the property because it hadn't been commercially used in 40 years. And so everything from keeping a lot of the vintage tile and the vintage woodwork that was there and restoring it. And even the chairs in the dining room, for example, are, these chairs with these nice rawhide backs. We wanted to keep that theme and embed it into the architecture of the bar. We found the vintage skis, cross-country skis from the property that were just in one of the back sheds. And in building the bar, we constructed it from the vintage skis. So we really tried to take advantage of everything that was on the property and preserve its history and that vintage charm, that small local ski resorts have still to this day, keeping them very, very different in feeling that, your bigger corporate ski resorts and environments. I think that was one way. I think the other way is sort of in the culture of the place. I think from the moment we founded it, we always wanted for it to be just a place of welcome, a place of belonging, a gathering place is really the word that I always use for equally, folks visiting the area to folks that live in the area year round or seasonally. And from its get-go, we decided that we were going to, have, of course, all of the services, the bar and the gym and everything open to the local community as well. And then recently, which was the spirit of Paleface, it was very much a family-friendly gathering, open and welcoming place. And very recently, we also announced that, the 45 miles of trails that we've created now, some of which are former ski resort runs, some of them are new trails that we've created. We've made them free and open to the community and the general public year round. And so that I think is very much in sort of the spirit and the culture of what Paleface was founded on.
That's amazing. So you acquired the property in 2022 and it was dormant, right? For a long time. What was it like when you got there? What was the task like ahead of you?
Oh, it was daunting. It was a little bit like, my husband says it was a little bit like The Shining. So I remember we closed on October 31st, Halloween of 2022, and they were down in Rhinebeck. And a week later, there was a snowstorm that dropped several feet of snow. And I was on this massive property. There was no one there except the former caretaker who was already packing and planning to go. And I was trying to head up to the mountain house in the middle of the snowstorm on this road that is 3/4 of a mile and intense in its grade. and alone. And I got to a point in the road right before the steep pass where I was like, I can do it. I can get up there. And of course I drove up and then I slid down the mountain.
Slid down.
Oh, man.
And I slid deep into a bank, thankfully not really damaging the vehicle too much. But at that point, I was halfway up the mountain. So I had to decide to hike up or hike down. And I trudged up through the several feet of snow to the house. And it's just, it's a big house up there also as well, like the lodge, and full of stuff, full of the former family stuff still at that stage because we had just closed, but empty and silent and all the creaking noises, and it was daunting. It was really daunting at first because I was away from my family. I didn't know anyone in the community, though I had been visiting the area. So I didn't always know who to call or who to reach out to. And the property on top of that, the house built more recently, had plans and permits in place that I could reference, talk about the electrical systems, the plumbing systems. The lodge has nothing. Not with the park agency, not with the townships. And so unless it was renovations that were done more recently by the family, everything from 1960 to 1980, and it's, when it was built, none of that was there. So imagine, and I was handed a bucket of keys by the former caretaker who wasn't too friendly to us purchasing the property, no maps of the systems, stuff everywhere. I mean, floor to ceiling full of stuff that the family had left behind. It was daunting.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. How long did it take you from when you took that bucket of keys to you had your first, opening day as a business?
Oh gosh. It was, the 2 months in 2022 and the full year of 2023. So I'd say the first few months were me just room by room, and the lodge is 25,000 square feet. The house is 13,000 square feet. And then there's another 8 outbuildings. So it was going room by room and kind of creating piles as one does, right? Things to donate, things to keep, things to get rid of. And I think we ended up something like 25 dump trucks of stuff that we just wasted, another probably 5-6 dump trucks of stuff to donate. So that alone was a massive task. And then second, to start to document the systems and all the deferred maintenance, what was working, what was not working. And because we bought it as is, right? And we did an inspection prior to closing, but, there are leaks, there are boilers that are, at the end of life, there are electrical systems that weren't done to code. And so making a massive list and then just starting to form a plan of attack, and hire, folks and experts to work with us. So it was a year and 3 months.
That's unbelievable. That's incredible, actually. And I think it's worth noting, you had a very successful career with organizations like Google, McKinsey, the World Health Organization. And so, on paper, it seems like this is a very different pivot for you, a very different life. From going from working at Google to figuring out the septic system of this new place, maybe those, you were in tech, so maybe there is a lot of similarities there, but, what made you sort of redirect what you were doing?
At its core, I'd say, I love just in any job that I've done in bringing new life to something or building something new. So I think one common theme, despite me having different roles from a physician to an engineer and a data scientist, to now, a hospitality and tech entrepreneur, I've always everywhere in established corporations like Google and McKinsey to something like this have loved bringing new life into something that is somewhat stabilized, but has this incredible vision that is just needs to be dusted off and structured and, and grown and nurtured everywhere. At Google, I started a huge team of sales engineers, the first of its kind that I grew globally. At McKinsey, I started a new service line and business line for them. At the World Health Organization, we did some, incredible new research, so like in each of those places, I'm always drawn to, I see an opportunity, a glimmer of opportunity, and it's bringing it to life. Beyond that, I wouldn't say it was necessarily a hard pivot. These things kind of happened in my life, organically. And with this, while I was at Google, in the latter years of Google, we founded again organically Cascada Farm. And that was by 2022, already a couple of years in operating successfully. I enjoyed the process of I mean, imagine this is a 1780s farm. So way older even than the 1960 history of NewVida. And that was a journey, but a beautiful journey to bring back to life. And so after having that experience and enjoying it, I thought, okay, let's do this at an even grander scale where, it's actually a proper hotel with all the services and everything else. My husband does think I'm a little bit crazy at times. He gives me this card where actually I'm staring at it now because I always have it up here. And he always says that he got me this, and says it embodies my mental attitude at approaching life. Exactly. And it says, risk more than others think is safe, care more than others think is wise, dream more than others think is practical, and expect more than others think is possible. And that's kind of just the way I approach everything.
I love that. But there had to have been a moment where you're like, what have I bitten off here?
What have I done?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There were, I would say there was one that was hard in some ways. I've spoken about it before, but again, we didn't know anyone in the community. And the only remaining employee that we inherited with this property when we purchased it, who was still on site, told me very early on, and he was the only person with any knowledge and history of the property. He said to me this abruptly, he said, I don't agree with your lifestyle. Moreover, I don't want my kids anywhere around you.
Oh my God.
And this is him, I'm a father with 3 kids. I love them to death. And it was just, I've never heard something that abruptly and that, directly to me. And I thought at that moment very quickly, I'm either going to run him off of the property for saying something so offensive, or I'm going to kill him with kindness. And that's what I did. I actually ended up helping him and his family. They still, we decided it wasn't good for them to remain working on the property. They had, very different points of view in terms of how they wanted to live their lives, and that's okay. But I just continued to provide them with kindness. And I remember at one point later, he said he was in disbelief. That left a mark on him, that I did that, because he expected from that statement to be chased off. It was almost like he expected it. And when it didn't happen, I think that perhaps, hopefully, planted a seed in his mind of change. But at that moment, I do remember talking to Matt, my husband, saying, like, what did we do? This was at that time, this massive property, as I've described, half the systems were not working, full of stuff that had to be thrown out and taken away. I was alone 3 hours away and very lonely. And now I had this guy who said this to me. And it was just, I had that moment like, oh God, Rick, what have you done? But I can tell you, not too long after that, just a couple of days, that person did not embody the Adirondack spirit. This gentleman, just 2 or 3 days later, he was a Verizon worker and couldn't have appeared stereotypically in person to be someone that perhaps was more conservative in their point of views. But he came up to the house. I was there alone. I had all of this burden, in my mind. And I told him a little bit. He said, "You look frustrated." And I told him the story of what had just happened with this individual. And this gentleman, who I'd never met, reached out and gave me a hug.
Oh.
And this is like the burliest, of guys, and said that one of his best friends growing up was gay, that he couldn't have believed that this was told me, and that no matter what his points of view, he was also conservative on the political spectrum. Fantastic, right? That's okay. And he said, no matter points of view, he said, the fact that you are invested in this country, in the North Country, as they so proudly speak of themselves, that he would be there for me at any step, in the development of this property. He would always be there. He gave me his number, and he was.
That's amazing.
Still to this day, right? So that, I think, really is more the Adirondack spirit, right? If you're investing in the community up there, it doesn't matter where you lay. People are willing to put those thoughts and those ideas aside and really be there to support you.
That's a beautiful story. And I give you a lot of credit for taking that approach with that person. I think the normal reaction would be to say, get off my land. But that theme of that spirit, we hear it all the time on this podcast. And I think when we started this, Steve, I don't know about you, we knew that we were going to tell people stories about special places, but what really quickly evolved is the amazing stories of the people and the spirit and what you just described. I mean, look, this isn't, Stars Hollow up here, the Gilmore Girls. It is, there's some tough people there. It's a tough place to live. But I think because of that, people are much more willing, from my experience, to lend a hand, to help out. I think they're in a lot of ways a lot more accepting too.
Yeah, it's a strong sense of community and loyalty if you're investing in and nurturing, bringing something to the community in the right spirit, right, in the right light. And that's what I have found. From that moment on, I've not had a single other interaction like that first gentleman. But before I met that second individual, which thankfully wasn't too long after, I did have a hard pause. And I remember having a conversation with Matt and saying, like, what did we do? What did we do? This maybe wasn't the right place to do this. They're not going to welcome us. And thankfully we were wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the renovation. It's important, I think, for people to understand there's a lodge in the property where your rooms are, and then you have this mountain house that's up on Bassett Mountain. It's almost, I looked at it when I was considering buying. I was like, oh, that will be the executive retreat, or maybe I'll live up there. But in the actual lodge itself, I've stayed there. Were those guest rooms already there, or did you have to create those?
Some were there, some were not. So there are 14 suites in the lodge, and then the mountain house has 9 bedrooms, and the house can fit, up to 20 guests. So, in total, we can really, have the rooms fit 32. So we can really have about 50 or so people on the property currently, and are now seeking out partnership to grow that. But the rooms weren't all there because the family had broken down some of the walls and changed the layout, because that was their home. They really, when they lived in the lodge for all those years, they didn't want to feel like they were living in this big commercial building. And so they made a lot of changes in the kitchen, in the guest wing. So like some of the rooms were combined. There was one room that was the kids' classroom. There was another room that was, the rooms that were their bedrooms. There was another room that had a kitchen because the family wanted, everything in one place rather than having to walk to the commercial kitchen on the other side of the lodge. So we did have to make, some structural changes, right, to get those suites back in place. They were once there in the Paleface days, right? But the family then made changes, and we had to revert and make the changes back.
Again, how many square feet is that lodge building?
25,000.
I mean, I always knew it was large, but that's larger than even I.
Yeah. I mean, the great dining room now, as we call it, was a playroom and family room, and even that had a partial wall in it, because they didn't want to feel that vastness. The bar was an indoor basketball court.
Oh wow!
So that was all walled off, and there was a basketball court, and the lines, you can still see them if you go there. We wanted to leave that bit of history on the floor. The game room was the gym, the family gym. So it was very different in its use and in its layout, compared to what it is now.
Did they live there full time? Because you mentioned a classroom.
Yeah, they did live there full time for about 10 years. He ran his business there. They owned a magazine and rented out of there. They homeschooled their kids out of there. So they lived there for 10 years while they got the permits and plans and built the mountain house. And that was a separate multi-year undertaking. And then they moved to the house. And then after a time of living in the house, they had other properties too. They made the Adirondacks more of a vacation, place. They no longer live there permanently. But I'd say for a good maybe 15, 20 years they did.
So let's talk about, okay, so now you're up in business. You're running. What we haven't touched on is the food. And the first time I visited the property was for a brunch, and I've had dinner there. It's outstanding. What was your vision for the restaurant and the food?
So I'm Cuban by background. I love good food. I love bold flavors. I love diverse cuisine. I've had the privilege of living and traveling all over the world. When I was really doing a lot of medical relief work, I lived in sub-Saharan Africa for a time, traveled all throughout Asia doing work. And so I wanted to bring the boldness of those flavors to the Adirondacks, because one of the things that really stuck out at me over all the years of traveling there is that the food and the culture around food in the Adirondacks, though good, is really centered around, it's American or American Italian food catering toward your outdoor recreation enthusiast. So tavern fare, right? A good old American tavern fare, which is fantastic, right? With some French influences, Canadian French influences, right? Like your poutine and, things of that nature. But that was it. And there wasn't a lot of diversity. And even when I went to some of the diverse restaurants way out in Plattsburgh or way out in Saranac Lake, it was really folks in the kitchens that weren't from those countries and weren't trained there from a culinary perspective. And so I'd say it was almost like a watered down or mild version of the boldness of those flavors from those countries and from those areas. There were a couple of places that were doing, really diverse cuisine, but not much. So I wanted to capture that. And so I remember we first opened the cafe before we opened the restaurant. And I'd say 80% of the menu was Latin, largely Cuban. And a lot of the things were completely foreign to people in the North Country. And I think that, to some it was intriguing, to some it was, daunting, but I think it was new flavors. And we decided that even if it took some time for folks to ingratiate ourselves, that's what would make us distinct, is bold global cuisine. And we still, to this day, that's the heart of our cuisine, bold global cuisine. So we do have dishes, American dishes as well, that we celebrate. Like we have an après-ski menu, and we have, your pretzel bites with a twist, your poutine with a twist. Absolutely. But then we also have Vietnamese dishes and sauces inspired from South Africa and Cuban sandwiches, right? And we want to make sure that we're bringing that diversity, right, to the food and the culture there.
Now, in June, you welcomed Chef Vicky Brayette. Is that how you pronounce her name?
Correct.
I mean, she trained at, in London at a Michelin-starred restaurant. She's also worked at some very high-end places like The Point, the Lake Placid Lodge, and she worked at Paul Smith's, that has a very well-regarded culinary program. How is she taking your vision for these bold flavors and taking it to the next level?
She's amazing. She's really, really talented. I mean, she was one of the finding an executive chef that you really connect with well. And, unfortunately, in the culinary world is still plagued by a lot of, alcohol and drug abuse issues and, different issues, mental health issues and things of that nature. To find someone that brings that stability, that vision, that attitude is hard. I mean, I think in the first year we went through 4 chefs before we ultimately brought Vicky and brought the stability and beauty and growth that we have now. And including I was the executive chef for 2 weeks. So I can tell you about that. That was a really interesting story. But Vicky and I had met early on. We really, really connected deeply just from a personality and a vision perspective. Unfortunately, she was under contract elsewhere when I met her. She wanted to honor that contract, which I respect. And so when her contract came up for renegotiation, she reached out. We connected and we said, we need you here. Right. And she wanted to be here and she feels at home now. And she is incredible. She had her own restaurant, Caribbean Cowboy, for about, I think, 12 or 13 years that brought a lot of diversity to the cuisine in the Adirondacks and was a successful, local restaurant. And she loved global bold flavors. And so she's really continuing that. And I work with her, every menu she and I concept jointly to make sure that it's well-rounded. So,
well, how has the response been?
Oh, fantastic. Since Vicky has been there, I'd say, and I'm not exaggerating, 98% of our reviews have been 5-star. I know that from a restaurant perspective, there's only 2 other restaurants in the entire region that have sustained 4.7 rating and above on both OpenTable and Google. Now we're the 3rd. And there's only 1 cafe that has done that. And now we're the 2nd in that category. So we're really elevating that cuisine, and the customer reviews and the feedback corroborate that. And it's fantastic.
That's amazing. And I just want to, again, the dining room is in that giant A-frame. And, there are a lot of stunning dining rooms in the Adirondacks, but this is a place where the food lives up to the view. It's
Yeah.
really, I think that's important to know. And it's worth it. Even if the food wasn't that good, it's worth it just to go and sit in that dining room because it's a really incredible experience.
Yeah,
And
the dining room is incredible. If you're looking for something more casual, there's also seating in the bar and game room. For families, especially, like I was there this past weekend and we had our 3 kids and 3 kids from our friends. And it was so nice to the adults to sit in the nice dining room and then our kids were in the game room, running around and playing pool and table tennis. And in the summertime, when you come, we have seating for 50 outside. So the restaurant has seating for 115, which is phenomenal. And we can host more than that if we have a bigger wedding. But outside, the sunsets and the views are incredible. And so we get a lot of folks just come for cocktails, for appetizers, for drinks, in the summertime and sit outside and enjoy it.
Yeah, that lawn is gorgeous too. And you guys had quite a big group during the eclipse in 2024 too.
Yeah.
Because you were right on the path of totality.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit. So, it's a great destination for overnight guests. It's a great destination for food and wine and people who want a nice cocktail too. Can you talk about the other programs though and experiences that are available to either you mentioned the community or other people who are maybe in the area?
So I guess a couple of different things that we haven't talked about beyond the lodging and the food and beverage. So, one, events. We started this year hosting events and events of all sorts. From small local retreats, to holiday gatherings for families or, retirement parties, right? Anything of that nature, to weddings. And we've absolutely loved it because it provides an opportunity to bring the place to life with lighting and, it's just, you imagine you're already dealing with this incredible architecture and then you're infusing it with flowers and lights and, it looks incredible. It's breathtaking, both the house and the lodge. And so we're really, I think that's something next year that we're going to be building out immensely, the types and the number of events that we host. And we do have a private event space upstairs. Second, we do have an incredible wellness and fitness program. So we have a gym membership that is open to the local community. Obviously, overnight guests get access to it for free as part of their stay, but local community members can have a year-round full-service gym that they get access to, and it's all new equipment. And it's awesome. It's priced very, very affordably locally. I'd say it's probably the most affordably priced gym in the entire area. And that's open 24/7.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And I just want to underscore that for a second. Okay. Because Jay is not a big booming metropolis. It's a cute little town, but I don't even know if there's a stoplight in it.
Yeah.
If I wanted to join a gym, I would probably, they have a little YMCA thing in the town hall, but it's kind of spotty hours wise. The equipment's great, but if I want to join a gym though, I've got to drive at least 35 minutes. So for that community to have that amenity, that's amazing. It's not like, there's an Equinox around the corner. Gyms are hard to come by, and I think sometimes they're like real old-fashioned kind of places.
Absolutely.
So that's awesome.
Yeah, there's that. And then upstairs as part of that program, there's also the wellness services. So everything from massage therapy to, the yoga class curriculum and Pilates and fitness instruction. So we have a series, I think, of 6 to 8 contracted wellness experts that provide those services and are all really, really talented. And then I'd say is, the trail system, right, which is now completely open to the public, but then we also have experts that provide services on those trails, particularly more in the summer season, but instruction, right, from biking instruction to climbing to foraging, to hiking. These are great guides that you can venture out with if you feel, you want something more than just exploring on your own. And the trails are phenomenal. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I opened it to the public is the year that I lived there, I was on the trails every single day, whether I was jogging or hiking, and I just didn't see anyone enjoying them, because they were only open to the 200 or so gym members. And I said, people need to celebrate this. And so we cleaned up the trails, opened new trails, and there's just remarkable viewpoints, remarkable structures and rock formations. And there's hiking of all levels, from your beginner, nice walk that you can do after dinner with your spouse or cross-country ski to your super advanced and even technical climb, on the face of Bassett. So it is really remarkable.
That's so great.
And now this year, the other thing the community really wants, I'll note, is we are, for the first time, so we've kind of built all this out on our own. We are right now seeking out investment partnership and hopefully soon having a formal partner that we'll be able to speak more about publicly. But part of that will not only be to expand the lodging footprint, and some of it will be for homes that people can actually purchase, right? So to be like owning a home and a property on a full service 2,000-acre resort. And part of them will be hoteling. These will all be cabins, on the property, not lodge suites. And they'll actually be the first technical ski in, ski out cabins in the entire Adirondack Park system. Our goal is to have about 50 of those, 25 that are available for purchase, 25 that are for hotel guests. And when we do that, we're also going to be finishing the other half of the fitness and wellness center, which is the pool and spa and sauna wing. And that is going to have a 25-yard 3-lane lap pool. It's going to have a 6-person sauna. It's going to have 2 spas, an outdoor deck, and men's and women's locker room. Again, to your point, Jane, like you'd have to drive 40 minutes to Adirondack Health or sneak into, the one hotel that has, 1 or 2 hotels that have an indoor year-round heated pool to be able to get that. And so I think for the community, that's going to be big because there's a lot of folks that we'll have, wellness classes as well that are pool-based aquatic classes. It's hard to get that.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, you really have taken your husband's inspiration to heart in terms of thinking really big and daring for greatness. So I'm so impressed by that. What's it like trying to recruit investors for the Adirondacks? I mean, I have to imagine that people did, because one of the reasons we started this podcast and ADKTaste.com is people don't understand how big it is. They don't understand what's here. They think it sounds great. But it's not like the Hamptons, it's not like and I'm glad it's not like the Hamptons, but what's it like to try and attract investors? This sounds like big investors.
Very challenging.
Yeah.
Very challenging. I mean, I'll tell you, I've founded and sold 2 tech startups before this. And one of them, before, when I was attracting investors, I didn't even have the prototype, the application coded. I just had schematics of it, and I was able to raise several $1 million. And yet here I have a 2,000-acre resort with 8 buildings and an operating business that is already profitable. And getting investors for this is harder than it was for that. And I think that, some of it is just the fact that the Adirondacks is not well branded. I think there's somewhat of a brand that is still a legacy brand carried by Lake Placid, but is considered a little bit dated or inaccessible to those from urban areas. And then I think the second challenge is that you and I, Jane, spoke a little bit about that, is that there's incredible pockets of, through nonprofit organizations and foundations, pockets of efforts going on, but there's no central plan for the region, right? And I think a plan that provides balance, right? Because there's a lot of the local community that is anxious about development and new development. Rightfully so, right? We want to preserve the beauty that is this park system. However, that same community also recognizes the need for sustained economic development, right? They don't want, a drug pandemic. They see a lot of joblessness. They see, struggles, economically with year-round, working opportunities. These are hardworking families, and there's no one body with a plan to say, these are the industries that we want to attract to this community. These are the grants and state and tax incentives. This is how we want to develop accessible lodging for those communities. These are the school and university programs that are going to feed young talent and young minds in the area. This is the healthcare and the access to transportation to this region that allow, look, we have Montreal right there.
Right.
Right. And if you had the access to transportation that you would from the city to the Hudson Valley, you would have a different economy here. So again, we don't have to swing to the pendulum to the Hamptons. No one wants the Adirondacks to be the Hamptons, but there's a better, more balanced place to be than there is now. And I think attracting investors is hard because those two things don't exist. So I'm kind of fighting that fight on my own, again, doing it in an isolated way. But if there was a plan behind me for the region, I think the investment community would feel a lot more assured.
You brought up all great points. One other sort of slice of that too is there's a lot of resentment in the Adirondacks for feeling like we're being told by downstate forces, how you should operate your land. So a lot of the reason, or how you should operate your region. And so I think a lot of the reason why there are all these like pockets and all these sort of different people trying to be the masters of their own destiny in terms of promoting and building the business here is that it was kind of designed that way so that people felt like they had autonomy. So some of these different regions don't cooperate with each other. I'm not going to say who, but I encounter that a lot in what I'm trying to do. And again, when I started ADKTaste.com, it was sort of like this idea that let's be somebody's best friend in the Adirondacks and help people find the different experiences that are here, because the different parts of the Adirondack are very unique. There's Old Forge, there's Essex. They're completely different and in the best possible way. So I hear you. It sounds though like you're making headway and progress.
We're making headway, and and I'm advocating, to hopefully eventually find someone, the combination of someone I'm assuming would have to be with some government ties to play that role. But it almost like the brand and what you're doing is fantastic, for that region, shedding light on this community and sharing it. It needs, a strong visionary that is empowered, right? To be able to drive that. It's almost like a NewVida for the Adirondack brand.
Exactly.
Reimagining of that brand and where we wanted to be with all the community, voices embedded in it. But a lot of the wealth also in regions in this community don't invest in this community, right? And that's because it has the legacy, right, of the Rockefellers and the other families that do incredible philanthropy, right? The Adirondacks was a place of refuge, an exclusive refuge for them. They came to their estates and their camps and they stayed there with their staff and then left. And part of the lure was the exclusivity. So, they're doing philanthropic work, but it isn't with that cohesive plan. It'd be great to have one plan that includes everything from, Keene to Keysville, to Saranac Lake, right, to Old Forge, as you said, a comprehensive plan that is going to be like, this is healthcare, transportation, education, industries, right, tax incentives for everything from housing to commercial development. How are we going to do this? Where do we want to be in 5 years?
Yeah, look, we say this probably, if not every podcast, every other podcast, the Adirondacks is the size of the state of New Jersey. It is the size of the state of Vermont. Imagine if New Jersey didn't have a governor in each county.
Exactly.
Sort of legislative. How do you figure out transportation? How do you figure out schools? How do you figure out all these things? It could be its own state, so.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you have an entity like the APA, right, that has kind of a purview, but it isn't, the lens or the vision. They don't have the mandate, right, to have that plan. They're more the regulators, right? They're not the ones that then are going to create the visionary or the plan because they just don't have that mandate, right? Someone needs to have that mandate. And I draw the analogy a lot to the Hudson Valley. That is, when you look at the statistics, it is thriving economically compared to the Adirondacks. And it's nowhere near its size or vastness. And it's because there was a plan to evolve from what was Woodstock or these isolated townships driving their own agenda to the Hudson Valley. And that is now the brand. You Google it, you search it, you travel to the region. You don't just travel to a town. And that's what I think the Adirondacks has the promise of becoming, and doing it in a very safe and productive way to preserve its legacy and its history. But we first just need that leadership.
And also in my prior life, where I led global brand and marketing organizations, it frustrates me as a brand marketer when I see some of this stuff, not only because I'm like, okay, there's no like Hudson Valley, like branded house that we need. And instead it's my tax dollars. Sometimes I'm like, these my tax dollars not at work, because a lot of this stuff is funded by the state. But
Yep.
all right, we're getting way off topic, but it's a great conversation. I do have one question to ask you, because we've talked about it in relation to a Hotel Saranac, the Stagecoach Inn. Do you have a ghost?
So, the one that we've really made note of, we have this woman who works with us. She is incredible. And she says she senses energies, and she's been both a chef with us and a bartender. And when we first opened, so this is before we had the gym and a lot of the services, the events and, the game room even, we had just opened the cafe and the bar, and she was working the bar, and she always sensed from a part of the building that was then closed without knowing what was there, because, that area was completely closed off to staff and everyone else was under renovation, that she sensed an energy of a gentleman, and he was a kind gentleman. She didn't sense anything negative or, scary about it, but nevertheless, and it was really strong, and she felt his presence. And it was specifically coming from a part of the building that was, prior to our owning it, was the gym. And in that gym, the prior owner, who has long since passed, was a fitness enthusiast, so much so that there was a bedroom in that area, right, where he would, spend time, take a nap, take breaks, right, from his exercise routine, and then, return to it. And one wonders, was that the spirit? Was he, seeing everything that's going on? I know he was deeply passionate, despite the fact that his property was private, was there. He was deeply passionate about it and outdoor recreation and fitness. And maybe he was sitting on the sidelines watching it and and giving us some support. So he was the one friendly ghost that I'd say we've sensed.
Many of the stories we hear, and as I mentioned to you earlier, we had the Adirondack Park Paranormal Society on, which was fascinating. They actually stayed at a Hotel Saranac when they were going through their big renovation 10 years ago for 3 nights and recorded all kinds of activity. A lot of this energy or spirits or whatever you want to call them are friendly, they're just there. So that's a cool story. And if you ever want them to come in and investigate your property, I'm sure they would be happy to do that.
Yeah, if you ever want them to come, that would be fascinating. I would love
yeah.
Maybe that would be a great part 2. We could have you guys.
Yeah, I would love to see what they found out. Find it.
All right, that's a plan. Well, Rick, this has been a fascinating discussion and so interesting and amazing, the things that you're doing up there. Let's mention your website one more time, NewVida.com. Listener, check it out. There's beautiful photography and pictures of the property there as well. You're in Jay, New York, which is kind of in the northeastern quadrant of the Adirondacks, just south of Wilmington and Whiteface and west of Lake Champlain. It's a beautiful, beautiful area. So before we let you out into the wilds of the Adirondacks again, we end every episode by asking our guests to share their favorite place in the Adirondacks. I'm sorry you can't say NewVida. But as a way to give our listeners, whether they're locals or they're coming from out of state, and they're in your area or any area of the Adirondacks, I'm not going to limit it to your area. What's your go-to or must visit or just really favorite spot? And it can be anything from an ice cream cone stand to a High Peaks trail. It's you choose.
Gosh, well, I want to really, place it somewhere right in the Wilmington and Jay community to celebrate those communities. And I'd say one of the gems that will be growing and is incredible is the hardy mountain biking trails that border the NewVida property. And it's about 500 acres that have been preserved. And the Beta is a nonprofit organization. It's state land. They've created incredible mountain biking trails on it. They're expanding those trails, and it's going to be one of the largest mountain biking parks, again, of all difficulty levels in the Adirondacks. And especially with climate change and everything going on, the sport is really blossoming. And I think it is something in addition to Whiteface, which is just 7 minutes down the road and actually in Wilmington, not in Lake Placid. It is the Hardy Trails and the mountain biking culture, I do really think is a gem for the Wilmington and Jays community. And I'd love to see that continue to thrive and prosper. We're creating some of our own biking trails on our property, having a direct connection to them. And I just think it's awesome fun.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And thanks for joining us. And I'm serious. I think we should have you back with APPS and see what we can uncover.
I'd love to. I love that kind of stuff. So I'd love to.
All right, Rick, take care. Good luck to you and your husband and your family.
Thank you.
And and we'll see you again soon on the pod.
All right. Bye-bye.
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 Well, another incredible story of people coming to the Adirondacks with a lot of vision and heart and just doing something really big and bold here, not just in the property, but also in the kitchen. So
yeah,
another great story. That
property is just amazing. And that view of Whiteface is so spectacular. It's to be able to see the ski trails. I remember driving by it in my college days in my 72 Dodge Dart, and we always would do the same thing you did later on and dream of what it would be like to have a little tiny ski area right up looking at Whiteface.
Yeah. You know what, though? As I listen to Rick, and I've spoken to him a couple of times, like, I never had that kind of vision for that place. So I'm really...
No, he took it to a whole different level.
He's just so cool. I'm so glad. I'm so glad I didn't buy it. I'm so glad that I let them have it. So that's awesome. And, just a reminder, when we have these guests on, these are places that we or our team of folks have actually stayed or visited. So, I think that there was a comment on Apple Podcasts that one of our episodes felt like a commercial. These are not commercials. This is not pay to play. This is us and our genuine interest in some of these places in the Adirondacks and wanting to shine a light on them a little more. So please check out NewVida. Check out the other places we've talked about too. It's a great place year round. In the winter, you're close to Whiteface. They have great trails too at NewVida. In the summer, there's so much to do in that area. I think you'll love it, listener. All right. So I think that's a wrap, Steve.
Okay. It's been fun.
It has been fun. Listener, if you enjoyed today's episode, we encourage you to subscribe so you never miss an episode wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple or Spotify. If you also liked what you heard, visit our website, adktaste.com, and sign up for our newsletter so you never miss a new article, a new feature. We send that newsletter out about once a week, so we're also not big spammers. We don't have time for that. And we hope that you'll continue to tune in, and we'll see you next time on the pod.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.